Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Hanson here. So we're back with a brand new video, and I just wanted to spend some time to talk a little bit about Deno. I wanted to talk about what exactly is Deno, whether or not you should learn it, and should you ditch Node.JS. So first, let's talk about what exactly is Deno. So Deno is a runtime environment that is built on Rust. So like Node.js, it's also based on the V8 JavaScript engine. So in case you didn't know, with Node.js, the entire runtime environment is based off of Google Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine. Before, you were only able to write JavaScript code on the browser. The creator of Node.js, Ryan Dahl, he took the V8 engine and he based Node.js off of it, so that way you can actually write server-sided applications with JavaScript. So let's talk about what a runtime environment is, because a lot of people tend to think runtime environments are programming languages, like they kind of mix the terminologies up, but let's clarify that in this slide. A lot of people think Node.js is a programming language, and some people might think Deno is a programming language. They're not programming languages. A runtime environment is like a virtual machine that allows your code to execute. Basically, it's just a layer that takes your high-level code, so for example your JavaScript code, Python, Java, etc., and it takes it, it interprets it and translates it down into machine code where your computer can actually understand and execute those instructions. Okay, you don't have to worry so much about all of these low-level stuff, but you just need to understand that in order for your code to actually run, you need to make sure you have some kind of virtual machine that can interpret your code. So basically, in other words, in order for your code to run, you need a runtime environment. So for example, different languages have their own runtime environment, and some languages share the same runtime environment. So Java, Clojure, Scala, Kotlin, these are all programming languages that share the same virtual machine. So they're all part of the JVM family. So whenever you write Clojure or Scala code, it gets interpreted by the JVM, the Java virtual machine. And it takes care of interpreting that code and compiling that high-level code into machine executable instructions. So that way your computer can actually run all of the code that you wrote. And you can say that in some sense, JavaScript and TypeScript kind of share the same runtime environment. They can be ran using Deno and as well as Node.js too, with additional software installed. Now let's talk about why Deno was created. You know, Node.js has been around for over a decade, and why all of a sudden do we have a new runtime environment? Well, Ryan Dahl, the creator of Node.js and Deno, he actually did a talk about this, and I'll link the video in the description. It's actually very, very informative, and he talks about why he actually decided to create Deno, all the problems that Node.js has currently, and why he wasn't just able to just go back and fix all those things instead and just decided to create a brand new runtime environment. Now, one of the biggest issues was security. Now, when we talk about security, your Node.js application by default has access to literally everything. The network, so if you want to make HTTP request APIs, if you want to read and write files, I/O, environment variables, etc. And this can become problematic, and it can raise a lot of vulnerabilities in the software that you develop. And Deno basically sandboxes all of your code, meaning that it has no permission to access anything unless you give your application, your scripts, permissions to execute whatever it is that it needs to do. So for example, if you want to make an HTTP request, in Deno you need to provide the allow net flag. And another huge issue were node modules. They can become relatively large and take up so much space in your file system. In Deno, all you need to do is just import third-party packages by specifying an absolute URL that points to a Deno repository, which is basically hosted off of GitHub, and it will download all those modules to your system and it'll cache them. And this could be a good or bad thing depending on specific scenarios. Okay, so what are some features that Deno has that Node.js does not have? This is very important. This is actually a huge deal. So Deno out of the box supports TypeScript, which means you don't need to install additional software. You can just create a TypeScript file and start writing TypeScript code. You do not need to install a TypeScript interpreter. You don't need to set up a TS config. There's also top level wait, which means sometimes you might need to run an asynchronous function at the top level of your code. However, you are not able to do this in Node.js since you need to be inside an asynchronous function in order to actually use a wait. So in case if you needed to make an HTTP request, the workaround to this was using an immediately invoked function expression. Okay, but in Deno, they support top level await. And there's also browser compatibility. By default, Node.js does not support the browser's fetch API. It has its own environment and its own Node.js APIs. However, in Deno, there is browser compatibility, so you can actually use the browser's fetch API, the browser set interval, set timeout, and a bunch of other APIs that are part of the browser. Deno also supports ES modules instead of common JS, so you can use imports, exports, and you can also use URLs for importing modules. Alright, so now the main question of this whole video. Should we learn Deno in 2020? Now, it depends on a lot of things. If you enjoy learning new things, obviously it never hurts to tackle on a new language or environment. Things that you do in Node.js won't really differ that much in Deno. Deno is still also very new, and there are lots of things that need to be improved. There are a lot of unstable APIs that they're still developing on, but it is released right now and you're able to play around with it. But just be very careful and don't really worry too much about building large applications at the moment, because there are probably going to be a lot of things that are going to be changed in the future. And there aren't really that many resources for Deno at the moment compared to Node.js. If you go on YouTube, if you want to look up tutorials on full stack applications, you'll find a lot of resources for Node.js, but for Deno, you're probably not going to find that many compared to Node.js. And with that being said, if you've already established a foundation with Node.js, you shouldn't feel pressured to learning Deno. Node.js is not going to die anytime soon because it's already deeply embedded into the job market, into many different applications, projects, and it's not going to go away. There are still going to be many jobs that are going to be created, many people that are going to be hiring for Node.js developers, so don't disregard Node.js just because Deno came out. And there isn't a doubt that someday Deno may take over Node.js or might be on par with Node.js, but like I said, as of now, Node.js is still strong and will be strong for a very long time. Now, another question that I want to address is, should I learn Deno if I had just started learning Node.js or JavaScript for the first time? Yes and no. In my honest opinion, I believe that because the Deno community is still so very young, there aren't that many libraries, frameworks, modules developed for Deno yet. For example, let's say if you want to use some database ORM like SQLite or Mongoose, but there aren't any stable ones developed for Deno yet. And I wouldn't expect a beginner to implement their own ORM from scratch, since that's a pretty advanced project, but that particular scenario could hinder your project. Whereas in Node.js, there's SQLite, there's Mongoose, there's a whole bunch of ORMs that you can just use, and it's stable, and you can just easily develop your application with those libraries. And I feel like personally, it might be best to stick with Node.js if you just started, and you might want to consider learning Deno once you have felt that you've established an understanding with Node.js. And by then, the transition to Deno shouldn't be difficult at all, because literally a lot of things that are going to be done in Deno might be very similar in Node.js, and you will probably have a more mature foundation. You'll have more skills to be able to adapt to different environments very easily. And another thing that I should also mention is that the open source community is always developing amazing packages for other developers like us to use, and because of this, there is absolutely no doubt that Deno will only continue to grow as much as Node.js did over the past decade. But like I said, just to conclude everything, don't feel pressure to jump on the Deno bandwagon. Keep learning Node.js if you just started. There will still be demand for Node.js developers in the Java market if your goal is to become a Node.js developer, and like in the future, if you want to learn Deno, you can. But like I said, as of now, Node.js is fine where it is. Don't feel the need to jump into Deno just because everyone else is learning Deno. And with that being said, hopefully this video was informative. I just wanted to do a quick talk about Deno, what it is, and my opinions about it. And hopefully you guys can agree, disagree. Let me know in the comments what you guys think and whether or not you want to learn Deno. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.